Welcome to Text on Text. This is Jed Sundwall. This month, I'm joined by Johnny Rodgers. We're going to discuss the book, A Pattern Language. Now, if you're intimidated by this book, I think it's a little expensive. It's a very big book. Just FYI, I didn't read the whole book. I don't know if many people probably haven't read the whole book. It's sort of like maybe the Bible in that way. It's famous for bits and pieces. It's written as a collection of, you could call them vignettes. The book describes them as patterns, but descriptions of how to build the world, how to create the built environment. And it's a fascinating book. I talk about this in the episode, but it's not quite literature, but it also sort of is. It feels kind of like poetry to me. In any case, it's a beautiful book. I'm glad I own it. I really recommend familiarizing yourself, if not with the book itself, with the concepts from the book. There's tons of stuff to read online about it. Plenty of YouTube videos and things like that. And of course, there's this podcast that I think is enjoyable, whether or not you've read the book or anything. But really very grateful to Johnny for introducing this to me and for coming on the podcast. Enjoy. See you on the other side. All right, Johnny, welcome to Text on Text.
Hi, Jed. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know. It's great to finally do this. So before we can continue, you have to tell us, are you a technologist?
Yeah, I knew this question was coming. Okay. Like a lot of people from our generation, I got a computer and the internet at a very formative time. And I grew up in like rural Ontario in Canada and didn't have much access to anything. Tiny little school, very widespread farm community, and getting a PC and then getting on the web in the early mid 90s. Sort of switched on that bulb for me, like, oh, there's a big world out there and you can have an influence on it with these tools. When all that stuff seemed so wide open and kind of utopian. And I remember starting to make websites and little games and stuff with like Visual Basic at the time and feeling like a wizard, like from the books and sci-fi that I'd been reading. Yeah, I mean, I got the bug then when I was young and have been lucky to build a career around it.
Yeah. Do you mind? I mean, what have you done? I mean, actually, before you go, I think it's important that the audience know that, like, I met you, so to speak. We've never met in person, but I know about you from Tumblr. I mean, I think we followed each other on Tumblr 15 years ago or something like that. And you're not the only person that I consider like, a friend or fellow traveler that I met from back then. But yeah, tell a little bit more about your career and like what you've done.
Yeah, well, just to pick up on the Tumblr thing for a minute. I mean, You're right. It's crazy that it actually was 15 years ago. At least I was looking back at our old emails. But I was following your Tumblr at the time. Was it Manso?
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously we had like overlaps in interests and stuff. And you posted this great little piece called On Surfing and Reading Books. And I can remember it resonating for me. And the gist of it was making resolutions to spend more time being the person you wanted to be, which was a person who surfs and reads books. And I really liked that. And I liked your kind of like reflection and humility on why, despite loving those things, you weren't making time for them. Do you remember this post?
I do. I mean, I do one of those things now. Yeah, I don't surf anymore. I lived in San Diego and I wrote that. Yeah.
I like how you've like built this hack into your life where you're forced to read books for your podcast.
Yes. Yeah. It works out really well. So,
yeah, you figured it out. But as somebody who also likes to surf and read books, that definitely resonated. And I can remember we went back and forth on some of our projects that we were working on at the time. And yeah, it's just one of those wonderful things about the internet, or, what the internet maybe used to be, where you could find sort of a kindred spirit online, despite not necessarily having any, real world connection and build a, some sort of a relationship. So I think it's pretty cool. It's nice to be here after all of that.
Yeah. Look at us now. It keeps going. Yeah. I mean, I gripe a lot about social media. Obviously, it's been the source of a number of societal ills, and anyway, I think there's plenty of things to complain about it, but it's also undeniable that it's been good for me. I'm glad to know you.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So, but anyway, and then is there anything else, you feel like people should know? I mean, I'll out you as I know you worked at Slack for a long time. I mean,
yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously the premise of the podcast is to learn from, what people are reading, people who are in tech and how it's influenced them. I was, very early at Slack, worked directly with the founders of the company and was one of the first, few people. And so I was, an engineer there for about 11 years, from when we were just a tiny, almost failed startup to launching the product and, it taking off, and then eventually taking it public, and then eventually selling it to Salesforce. And then I left a couple of years ago. That's been sort of like the primary experience of my professional life. Before that, I worked for myself, doing web stuff, in my 20s. And then, I went to grad school, briefly, and then Slack. So that's kind of my career arc. And right now I'm at a spot where I'm just taking some time off, after Slack, and figuring out what's next, and dabbling in a few things, and doing a little bit of, investing here and there, and just trying to stay tuned into what's interesting and what I might want to work on next.
Amazing. I love it. Couldn't happen to a better guy. That's awesome. And so then you're a front end or web developer?
Yeah, my background is, I went to school to be a designer. I loved to draw as a kid, and I really wanted to be like an illustrator or animator designer type person. And in that period, late 90s, like early 2000s, Flash was like this amazing tool that lets you do all that kind of stuff as well as program interactivity. And that's sort of where I got my start. And then I kind of went backwards into like the computer science programming side of it. And realized over time that was actually more where my, interests lay, and also probably also where there was more job opportunities. I came at it more from like the design and interaction design side of things, and then ended up getting really turned on by programming, and building web applications. And so, I was a front end engineer, at Slack, and more recently have been, doing more mobile, development and design, building stuff for iOS.
Nice. Okay. Well, then, so I mean, the reason I pushed on that, I wanted to make sure we got that out, is because very relevant for the text we'll be discussing today. So, A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander. Tell me about how you encountered this book, and why you chose it, why you wanted to talk about it.
You know what? I wish I had a good origin story. I can't remember when I first was introduced to this book. I think it was one of those things where, you start noticing when something keeps coming up, like an idea, or a piece of media or something. And you start noticing like, hey, the things and people that I'm interested in keep referencing this other thing. And I think I sort of eventually over time recognized that was going on, and it's like, okay, I gotta check this out. And for those who are just listening along, this book is like a big, you could like press flowers in this book. It's a big, I don't know what, 1,100 page, hardbound book with very small type and a lot of little diagrams and stuff. So it's kind of like an ominous looking book. I guess that's actually kind of a cool place to start, is that when I did get a copy for myself, I was sort of fascinated to realize that it's not like a book that you're supposed to read back to front. It's more like a hypertext, but from the 70s. Like all these little pieces of it, these patterns in the pattern language, are all structured in a way that you're sort of supposed to jump back and forth between them and understand how they relate to one another. And you're never going to read 10 pages in a row. You're going to be constantly flipping. And so it's more like a reference manual or a toolbox, rather than some self-important long treatise on the topic. I think like you said, for software and for designing interfaces for people, that concept, which is really well understood now, of components and design patterns and reusable building blocks that you can sort of make a whole out of parts, that's really well established now, but it wasn't always the case. For me, it sort of resonated immediately with the kinds of things I was trying to do in my own professional work, but on the topic of designing for humans in physical space, in cities and buildings, and even individual rooms. So that's kind of how I came to it, and it's one of those books that I just have continually gone back to over the years. And every time I open it up, I'm sort of like impressed anew by the insights and the humanity and kind of warmth of the book. It's a very, very, I don't know. It feels like the people who wrote it were very kind and wise.
Yeah. Well, it's really funny. I mean, it's awesome. This book has, I've heard about it over the years. It is similar to you. I mean, it's the kind of thing, like, it just kind of kept like showing up places. And I hadn't thought about it for a while. And then you suggested, and I was like, oh yeah, that thing. Like, I've heard about that thing. So thanks for sort of pushing me over the edge to get it, because it is a delight to own and to flip through. Learning about it and understanding that this guy, Christopher Alexander, like, was in Berkeley when he was like, I mean, I can say this, and I some people might be offended, but it's okay. But like, my favorite relative, Jane, lives in Berkeley. I just love her to death. She's like my she's my dad's cousin, I think, or second cousin, like distantly related somehow. But she's my dad's cousin. Just the best, but has lived in Berkeley for forever. And like, this book, has like such Berkeley vibes to it, of just sort of like how a place could be in terms of like aliveness and awesomeness. And especially of an era, like the 70s or whatever, like you can feel it, which is great. Yeah.
Berkeley's a special place, and it is definitely of that time and place, and the counterculture and like the sort of opportunity to imagine things anew that sort of came out of California and specifically Berkeley at that time. Although I found out in sort of prepping for this that he was actually the Christopher Alexander, the primary author, was Austro-British, and sort of found his way to America, where potentially, I guess, these ideas had a bit more fertile ground than they may have in old world Europe. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's so many thoughts on reading the book. So first of all, like, to anybody, I don't know how to like preface this, or like I'll have to somehow explain it on the site.
I can give it a go if you want.
Oh yeah, go for it. I'm just saying, like, you don't have to like read the book. Like, it's just sort of like, it's a very interesting book that like engaging with it is like, you're just like, just read like the introduction and how to read it, and then flip around. Merely knowing how the book works is really fulfilling. Like, it's just good to know that the book exists, even, which is like kind of interesting. But go and explain it. Yeah.
Sure. So it starts with this section that's like how to use this book. And first off, it's one of three. It's like, and actually he wrote even a fourth before he died a couple of years ago, on the nature of order, I think it's called, where he went even farther to like expand it to like all of like natural systems and natural geometries and stuff. I haven't read that one, but so this is the second. So the first book was called The Timeless Way of Building, and it was like a sort of theory and philosophy book for people in that field. And I haven't read it. I've heard that it's denser and like not as accessible for people outside of the field. Pattern language is where he took all those ideas about how to build for people, and then, made this practical library of sort of reusable blocks and patterns.
Right.
And, it has become really popular, I think, because it's applicable to so many different fields, that anywhere that you're designing for people, I guess. And then the third book was called The Oregon Experiment, where in Eugene at University of Oregon, I guess, they applied these ideas to like a redesign of the campus. I haven't read that one either, but they actually like sort of like went ahead and did it. So they took it from theory into, real built reality. So it's like, this guy's life's work is in these four books, which I think is very impressive in its own right and doesn't necessarily happen anymore or all the time. So that's kind of like how to understand it, but you can definitely like just read it on its own. I found this one quote, which I thought did a good job of explaining, what they're trying to achieve, abstracted from the details of it. It's toward the end of the intro. He says, "In short, no pattern is an isolated entity. Each pattern can exist in the world only to the extent that it is supported by other patterns. The larger patterns in which it is embedded, the patterns of the same size that surround it, and the smaller patterns which are embedded in it. This is a fundamental view of the world. It says that when you build a thing, you cannot merely build that thing in isolation, but must also repair the world around it and within it, so that the larger world at that one place becomes more coherent and more whole, and the thing which you make takes its place in the web of nature as you make it.
I love it.
Yeah, that definitely speaks my language.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's so it's interesting. I mean, the sort of the conceit of this podcast is like, I want more people to read literature. I'm also a humanities guy, studied Spanish and English literature in undergrad. And I was like, yeah, like more people in technology should read literature. And then you suggested this book and I'm like, is this literature? Like, it's kind of like I don't know what this is, but like, it's definitely literature. Like, in the sense that like, it's philosophical, but it's also like a bit of a fantasy, I mean, there's so much to say, but like, I mean, like the first, it's really great. Like you read the whole thing about like, what is a pattern language, the summary of the language, how to use this book, all that sort of stuff. And then it's okay. We're off to the races. We're going to start with towns, like how do you build a town? But then even before that, where is it? There's some funny page where it's just sort of like, try to create a global government. Oh, yeah. It's like, there's the section on towns that starts out. And then like, even before he starts like the first sort of chapter or section of that, the part on towns, which is called independent regions, there's just like one line on a page that says, do what you can to establish a world government with 1,000 independent regions instead of countries. And it's like, okay, like, sure, I will do what I can.
That's so funny. I mean, it's very idealistic. And for all the detail in it, it leaves these huge gestures toward like the way human society should be organized that feel very far from where we are. It's interesting. I think sometimes I'll read one of the patterns. Like you mentioned that you had read the one called Eccentric Nucleus.
Yeah, just because I was like, I got to see what this is about.
Like what a great term. And that one I found like very difficult to decode even what he's trying to get at. Like it's this very abstract idea of how to organize regions of density within a city or a town. And it's like, man, I don't really get this. And I can't even relate it to like cities I think are good. And then other ones, like he has a whole section on bike paths and racks. And when he was writing 50 plus years ago, a lot of that stuff was, not happening. Like there was not like bike paths beside the roads all the time. And then, I live in Vancouver and I have watched over the last decade as almost literally the ideas that he wrote down have been, so widespread and so recognizably, positive for communities that it's been implemented in real space. And so I guess to get back to your point, it's like he did have an unbelievably ambitious perspective on the positive influence that this kind of design thinking could have on how we organize our communities. And in some places it has broken through, and in others, we're very far away. So when I find one that I don't get, I try to like see it from like that, centuries long type bigger perspective to see like, can we get there? Yeah.
No, he there's a bit of like the mystic in this, he has this really grand vision of like, in fact, it's sort of like in the title of the last book, like the order of nature or the nature of order.
The nature of order. I can't remember which.
Yeah, I think it's the nature of order. And like, I was watching some YouTube videos with him because they're just like these old videos of him, just yammering on about, all his crazy ideas. And he's like, I wrote this book like so many times. And he's like, I went through all these different titles. Like one, like I just wanted to call it Geometry or The One. And I'm like, this guy's awesome. Like, definitely like a mystic. He seems to kind of like have the confidence of like of a prophet. Mm-hmm. And what I love about the book is that, again, what I was saying before about sort of like the mere existence of the book is like cool because it purports to like have the answers to all these things. Like, how do you build a side garden on your house? And it's like, here's the answer.
Right. And here's the details that are going to matter in it achieving what you want. And here's the like the pieces that if they're missing, you're gonna fail. He also has this concept the the quan, quality without a name. To your point,
okay,
like sort of mysticism, where he's talking about like the ineffable aspects of a designed space that make it work or not. And obviously he's trying to give those things names, but at some point it just kind of like it works or it doesn't. It's sort of like a feng shui type idea. I don't know how much he was influenced by some of the Eastern ideas around this
it's
stuff.
Berkeley.
But it seems likely, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, but he does also like, so this is a book that's up there that I will see named alongside Seeing Like a State, which is another. So Seeing Like a State is also not fiction or anything like that, but it's up there. I mean, for me, it's probably one of the most influential books or books that's had the biggest impact on me as somebody who works in a lot of like policy stuff. And so Seeing Like a State is the whole idea is like we have these nation states, these huge organizations that have a lot of power, and control huge populations, and like they want to structure the world in such a way that so that they can control it. And like an amazing insight from Seeing Like a State is that like last names are metadata for people, that like it was an invention of the state so that you could figure out like, you know, you go into rural Ontario and you're like, did we tax the right Johnnies, like all the Johnnies that are here? And you know, because you know, you would have to have like Johnny Johnson, you know, to know like which one, or Stevenson. And so like a lot of our world is structured by powers that, you know, want to control the world. And what's beautiful about the whole conceit of this book is this idea that's like, no, like there is a way to build the world, but it is like a language, and it's like poetry or prose where there are right ways to do things, but the way that they interact and the way that you have to do it, like they have to be aware of each other, and it can't be, you know, he describes a way of like having the right answer, but the application of these right answers is like very emergent, you know, and flexible, which is, just the idea of the pattern language, I think is amazing.
Yeah, I think it's that's like a through line in all of his work is like the organic, emergent, ongoing nature, because they're living systems, right? I think he's rejecting the idea that you can design something like a city or a house top down, literally 2D on a map, and say, this is how it will be, when of course it's constantly changing and deteriorating, and it needs maintenance and new needs and new people involved. And I think one of his answers to that was that you have to make it participatory, and you have to give the tools of maintenance and evolution and, you know, creation and destruction to the people who are actually using it there. And this happens whether city planners like it or not. But I think his point was, if you involve people from before the shovels hit the ground to, you know, decades after it's been built, you're going to end up with better outcomes, because they're going to tailor it to the needs of their communities and be able to evolve it as things change, rather than, you know, trying to stick to some predetermined idea of what a city or a house or whatever is for. I wondered actually, so I love this, and like so many of these patterns sort of like I can relate to things that I've encountered in my own work. For a lot of people that I've recommended the book to, that it's just been like completely opaque. So I wondered if it actually might be useful to like, I came up with two examples of like a building and a community that sort of violate a lot of these principles, and then one that sort of works with them. And I picked two things that maybe people have like a little bit of familiarity with. Do you think that would be useful to sort of visualize?
Yeah, let's go. Sure.
So the negative one first. Have you seen or been to Apple Park, the Ring?
I have not. I've been to Apple's old Infinite Loop campus, but yeah, I haven't been to the Ring.
So I can't remember how long ago it opened, 7 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
For those who haven't seen it, it's a very science fiction looking ring. It looks like a particle accelerator on the surface. And it's huge. It's this massive, perfect circle at Apple's campus in Cupertino. And it was sort of the last thing that Steve Jobs worked on, and Johnny Ive worked on it before he left Apple. And it's this, big edifice to Apple. And it's their HQ now. And I was thinking about it, and I've never been there. So this is all sort of secondhand from people who have worked there, or, the architectural critique of it and so on. But I think it's a good example because it really clearly violates a lot of the things that they're talking about in pattern language. So I'll just quickly talk through that. So first off, it's it's literally a walled garden. It is an enclosed circle with a private garden in it. So, draw your own analogies to different ways of organizing tech and Apple's approach to things. It's not connected by transit. It has 9,000 parking spots on site. So everybody's expected to drive there, although they do have a shuttle service. There's no access for the public. And I confirmed with a couple friends who work there that even employees can't freely come and go to the green space inside of it. You have to have special permission or be escorted or whatever. Inside, it's, it's the sort of Apple store as applied to an office park. So it's glass walls that people bump into and hurt themselves because they can't see the walls. It's a ring, but you can't circumnavigate it because there's locked sections because it's a very private, secretive type of set of departments. A circular pathway is super inefficient to, try and get where you're going. If you think about how pathways form in parks and, university campuses. It's, as I said, only for employees, and there's no daycare, for example. Compare that to some other office parks which have on-site daycare to make it easier for, working families to thrive. It's kind of this perfect example of form over function. It seems like it was designed from the top down, or even from the materials out, because it's all about this fancy glass and fancy wood and stuff. It's monolithic. It's not broken up into pieces that are sort of human scale. And instead of functioning like a campus, which, has so many positive experiences when you're a student, it's more like a monument. It's meant to be understood as this very big, powerful thing. And so I was trying to understand why I react against it. And it seems like a lot of people have sort of reacted against it. I'm sure there's lots of people who love it. And obviously Apple has done so many amazing things over the last 4 years, but I went through, and there's all these patterns that he lists that it sort of directly violates. So positive outdoor space, meaning accessible entryways. And he talks about nested L's of buildings and stuff that create courtyards and places you can walk through. This explicitly doesn't have that. He talks about pursuing building complexes versus single monolithic buildings. And he specifically says, do not build large monolithic buildings. It violates the idea of a work community, which is, integrated with city life, and where you can go to work, but at lunchtime you step out and maybe you're running errands or you're visiting, a shop or whatever it happens to be. It violates soft inside walls. He talks a lot in the book about the texture and warmth of the materials that we encounter. And you know what it feels like to have a nice, terracotta or stucco or, mud type wall. Or even paneling, that kind of thing, versus a glass wall, which is cold. It echoes, it's hard, and so on. And then finally, scattered work is this idea that community thrives when personal and work places are interwoven. And there's a more natural gradient between those things versus this idea of I'm driving 2 hours from San Francisco out to the office park and I'm parking my car and I'm working for the day and then I'm coming home late and I'm completely separated from my community in the time in between. So I just thought it was interesting because this isn't to rag on Apple Park. It's just to say that we make decisions about the kinds of structures and, regional groupings that we define. And those have such a dramatic impact on our lived experience of cities and of our work and our lives and our buildings. And this is kind of like a perfect example, I think, of the kinds of things that he was trying to work against in his time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and also explain like it's a great book in that, like I said before, like it does at least purports to have answers. Like, and he talks a lot about like what makes a place feel alive. Like what gives it, what was he said? Like the quality, the unnamed quality, like
Quality without a name.
quality without a name, the Quan. Yeah. Like, that's what he's sort of getting, is just trying to figure out like how to, like, what is it about these like places that feel alive? Like what makes them feel alive?
Yeah.
And it ends up, sometimes in these somewhat inscrutable recommendations, like eccentric nucleus, where you're like, I kind of think I understand what you're saying, but I don't know how to build that.
Yeah, or like extremely specific guidance, like windowsills should only be about 16 to 18 inches above the floor, because then people of all ages can see out them. Children can see out them. It provides often a place to sit if you make it in a thick wall. It provides light at varying angles, so it's not all just coming in at your like eye line, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And it's like, from global government down to like, here's how you should build your windowsills so that you can sit on them comfortably. Like everything in between.
Yeah. No, it's I put the word out like on LinkedIn. I was like, hey, I'm reading this book. Does anybody have any patterns they recommend? And somebody recommended variable ceiling height. So it's the same sort of thing where there's like, he has this recommendation. He's like, there are different ways that you can calculate how high a ceiling should be. And depending on what you want the room to be like, that'll impact your decision. So like if you want a formal setting, you want a higher ceiling, somewhat more like austere vibes or something like that. But if you want an intimate setting that is only going to fit a few people, you should have a lower ceiling height. And then there's another thing that I've encountered throughout the book is like, there's no like real research that goes into it. Like, it's just sort of, it's just, I think his intuitions are right. And he's been an architect for a long time and works with other people. They're like, we're pretty sure this is the right way to do it. But one thing we found is that like spaces that have variable ceiling height feel better.
Right.
We think, we're pretty sure.
It's very much like practical knowledge drawn from their practice. Of actually building and investigating these spaces. Yeah, it's not proposed scientifically, but it's like a system that has its own internal coherence, I guess. Yeah. And then, even in some places, at some point, he introduces a legend of the number of asterisks which are beside a pattern. And I can't remember which way it goes, but basically, like the ones with one asterisk, we're very sure that this is the right way to do it. And then ones with like 2 or 3, we have some ideas, but we haven't quite solidified this idea. So he's sort of like recognizing that it's still kind of emerging from what they've been doing. So I guess that's like a reasonable place to get into like the positive example. So, go. Yeah. I used to go to New York fairly frequently for work because Slack had an office there. And I used to spend a lot of time at Bryant Park. And thinking about what makes that space so great. And I think a lot of people have been there. If not, Google it. You can get a great overhead view and understand what's there. So, it's a city block park in Manhattan. And it has had a long history and was most recently sort of redeveloped just in the last couple of decades by Olin, the landscape architect. I'll just talk about like some of the things that make it feel so good and that completely agree with the patterns in this book. So it has many pathways. It's not one of those formal grid type plans. It has that, but there's so many ways to get between the sections, and it's sort of like nested layers of like green space, pathways, shade trees. There's loose seating that you can move around versus like, think of how many benches or parks you've been to where the benches are fixed. And, it's just really not that useful. Whereas Bryant Park is full of hundreds of foldable chairs that just belong to the park. They don't belong to a specific, cafe or something. There's food and coffee available, but there's no enclosed commercial space. It's all just kind of walk up. There's ping pong tables. There's areas that are sort of like naturally lend themselves to things like group fitness classes. There's the big sunny green where people can lay out if the weather's nice. The library is right there. And what I learned in researching this, the library stacks are actually underneath the park.
Oh,
yeah, like the library
I didn't realize
archives.
that.
I didn't realize that, but like when you look at it top down, the library takes up sort of like a third, and it's, you know, like the main branch of the New York Public Library. But then underneath the park is actually like a catacomb of library archives, which I just kind of love.
Oh, wow. I love that.
It's subway accessible, obviously, in Manhattan. There's an ice rink and a winter market in the winter. It's just this amazing place, and it always feels good to be there. And I always find myself gravitating there. And so I was looking at the patterns that he was talking about, and he has this idea of small public squares, an accessible green, a promenade where you can sort of stroll and experience different modes of a space as you go, you know, whether that's entertainment or recreation or tranquil, you know, quiet, or, you know, access to the library. And then, you know, New York does this well, even for all of its faults, the web of public transportation. It's easy to get to and from this place.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, it's about the choices that are made to make this possible, to fund this space, and to, you know, maintain these sort of public goods that enrich the community around it. Because this could be very different. It could be fenced. It could have, you know, private restaurants that you have to pay to sit down. It could have blocked entrances so you can't get around the back of the library, and so on and so on and so on. It could have those signs up that say things like "no ball playing," the different things you're not allowed to do in this public space. And it's the exact opposite of that. So I think some people sort of perceive this book as being like pretentious, but I think that like the thrust of it is so focused on humane design for people, and sort of reaching beyond that to say not just the individual experience, but that you can make a better world, you can make more harmonious communities, you can make more peaceful societies by choosing to invest in these types of things. And I think that's what has made it so resonant for so many people over the decades.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really beautiful in that way, and it's like your two examples are great. I mean, sorry, I'm going to talk about seeing like a state again, but like Apple Park is very much like what seeing like a state what calls like high modernism, right? So it's very 20th century. Another example is very similar to Apple Park is the city of Brasilia, which was like. It was designed as like, wouldn't it be cool if the city looked like an airplane? Because airplanes are awesome. You know, that's really what they did. They're like, airplanes are like modern in the future. So like, we'll design the city to look like an airplane from the top down. And then of course the lived experience on the ground is like, not just famously not good. I actually interned at the State Department, at the embassy in Brasilia in 2003. So I've been able to live there. Very cool city, like amazing city to visit. But you know, people don't like living there. Like it's a lot of people that work there or live there. They're there because they work for the government. And so they're sort of forced to. And I think what is awesome about this book and Alexander's approach is he does really thread the needle really well, where he's like, oh, like there's an answer to how to do stuff. And like, if you are, let's say the New York City government, there are decisions that you can make. But using language itself as a metaphor is really awesome, because he's like, no, like these are all the component pieces, like, and you just sort of think about it as like syntax in a language that, you know, things that are locked and they have an order to them. And if you get it right, it can be something really beautiful. I mean, I felt this way, like reading in the introduction to the book where he talks about the summary, that like, that's also the table of contents where he sort of lays out like, here are all the different patterns, but like, I'm just going to read them. Like, I'm just going to read a few of them. Carnival, quiet backs, accessible green, small public spaces, high places, dancing in the street, pools and streams, birthplaces, holy ground. And that's like a poem. Like it's beautiful. And like, I just, I read through all like the whole thing, and it's like a poem, like you said, of being like, this is the experience of being a human on this planet with other humans. And it's awesome. Like, or it's like what it could be. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And just in that like list that you shared there, it's like there's like a reverence for human life.
Yeah.
And I think so many schools of thought try to impose this idea of this is how people should be. this is how our society should be. And it's very sort of directive and dictatorial. Whereas I think he's saying this is how people are, and we should build around those ideas. And it's like a very responsive rather than directive type of design approach. I also love, like, the whole book is structured spatially from large to small, global and like regional type scale, all the way down to, by the end, he's talking about the objects in an individual room and how they make up like subspaces within a room. And I think that's a really cool way to sort of like really consider the whole for the parts. And then also he's constantly interweaving the temporal scale of human life and talks about that explicitly a number of times, from infancy to death. And like some of my favorite patterns are, there's one called Children in the City. And he talks about, you know, how giving children access to the world around them in all of its forms is essential to making them a whole part of the society, that they are not to be sort of kept away just in schools and, you know, private spaces. They need to see and interact with all of the things around them, all the modes of life, all the ages of people, all the different ways of being. And by doing so, they will become wonderful adults in the community. And he talks about how to build a city around children. And then at the next one, or one very close to that, is called Old People Everywhere. And it's exactly this idea. He says something like, the old people need each other, but they also need the young people. And, you know, in, you know, this like very nice idea of like village life in a past time, that was kind of built in. Of course, there was old people everywhere because they lived in the same house as their children and their children's children. And obviously so many of our modern social structures have completely upended that and locked old people away and kept them in separate communities where they don't have access to people of different ages and don't have access to the life of the city, and what a loss that is for everybody involved. And so, you know, he's constantly kind of zooming in and out, I guess. And I think like that, in my experience, is also the sign of a good designer. No matter what you're working on, who can go right into the granular details of something, like in the web, like an individual form element and how it interacts with things, all the way out to like, what's the big picture of like what this is and what's the business model and how does it fit into like the rest of the ecosystem, and being able to like constantly zoom in and out between those two things and like make decisions accordingly is kind of like how you get to a good outcome. And if you focus on just the former or just the latter, you're going to end up with something that doesn't work for people.
Right. And it's just so easy to see. I mean, this is where, you know, we can talk about like software design as well, like how easy it is for that like myopia to set in, or just, you know, you sort of like monomaniacally focus on, you know, one part of the economy or one sort of subset of users because, you know, they're the ones that make you the most money or something like that, at the expense of all sorts of things. And like, I read Old People Everywhere just because I loved, again, there's a lot of like Eccentric Nucleus and Old People Everywhere, just titles that I'm like, I got to read this one. And yeah, it's, you think about like, you know, suburb design, or I'm thinking about Brasilia, but you could think about like sort of like any suburb, you know, that's been built in the past, I don't know, 50 years or something like that, where it's like, of course everyone has a car, you know, and like, you just, it's a quick 3-mile drive to a grocery store or something like that. Like, there are a lot of old people. I mean, we have a lot of old people driving on the streets that shouldn't be driving. I feel like anyone who has parents old enough has felt this anxiety of like watching super old people get in the car. But beyond that, I mean, it's just sort of like a not great place for them to live. And as a result, you know, it's like, okay, as soon as you've aged out of the suburb, where do you go? It's like to a home somewhere. Who knows? You know, out of sight, out of mind, and that's tragic.
And your life may as well be all over. Like it's like a landfill for people.
You're right. Yeah.
Horrible. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like it.
No.
There is no reason, and obviously every family is different, and there are huge pressures on working families, and it's not easy necessarily to support elders in your own home, which is common in a lot of cultures or whatever. But you can make structural decisions about the types of housing you build, the types of, the sort of 15-minute city idea, so that you can have people of all ages and people of all phases of life, as he talks about it, integrated into the community and sort of recognizing the positive outcomes of both. Like, I think at some point he talks directly about co-locating daycares and elder care center because the old people and the young people understand each other.
Yeah. And they love each other. Have you ever seen Ponyo?
You know what? I've been working through all those movies and I haven't seen Ponyo yet.
Okay. Well, I think there's like an old folks home and a daycare right next to each other in that movie.
Right.
So,
and this is more common in Japan, right? Where old people are held in higher regard.
That's right. The Japanese get it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see if I can find this thing. Oh no, I may have lost it. Oh no, I found it. So you put the call out for like suggestions, or like restaurant suggestions in New York, and I recommended Elio's, and you went. Yeah. Did you? I mean,
we had a great experience. Like yeah. No, you guided me well. Okay, so first off, I like this anecdote. So I'm not really using Twitter anymore, but I was at the time. And I said, I'm going to be in Manhattan. I'd love a great place for a small dinner with friends, like 6 or 8 people.
Yeah.
And people gave lists and lists and lists of all their favorite places, which is awesome, but it's also overwhelming. Whereas your response was, this is the one place you got to go. Like, full stop, here's where you got to go. And I was like, oh, that says that he really means it. And so Elio's is amazing. It's this old school Italian place on the Upper East Side. And it's, kind of stuck in time from, I don't know, like the 50s or something. White shirted, older male waiters exclusively, packed into a tiny space with like elbow to elbow white tablecloth tables and the type of like really great handmade Italian food that everybody loves. Anyway, we go in, they seat us, we ate and ate, and everybody loved it. And at the end, the waiter came back and brought us like coffee and biscotti. And I was like, oh no, there's still some more stuff coming, because we had like made a list together of the things we wanted to eat family style, and we were still waiting on a few of the things. He got like so mad at me that he was like, no, I know what you ordered and you've had it all. Here's your coffee. It was like such a perfect like New York moment, like the exact opposite of like the sort of like customer service oriented thing. It was just like, no, this is the way it is. I was honest with him. I was like, look, we would like to eat some more. He like kind of gave me the eye. He's like, okay, takes away the coffee, brings out a whole bunch more food. It was a very singular experience. Anyway, great recommendation. Thank you.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so this is so funny. So Elio's, I mean, so I'm very biased here, and maybe I should have revealed this, but like Elio's is owned by a family friend that we've known forever. And she and her partner, I believe his name was Elio, they opened it in 1981, and it hasn't changed ever since. It's been exactly the same ever since. And like, so the 50s, 1981, like what's the difference at this point? Like it's like a really long time ago. But it is, reading this book and also, surprise, surprise, like Ann Isaac, who owns it now, anyway, I'm pretty sure Elio died, years ago. I'm probably getting all this wrong, but anyway, she grew up in like Petaluma in California and like spent a lot of time in Berkeley as well with Jane, my cousin Jane. Oh, they're like best friends. So, I think the Berkeley energy is in Elio's, but also like it's very New York, and it's also, there's just something about it that like they will never change. No one ever wants them to change. And if you go in there any night of the week, it is elbow to elbow. Like it's just packed with locals and old people and kids having birthday parties and, and families. And there's just something about it that they've figured out the Quan, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And even Yeah. Go ahead.
It has this like joyful chaos energy, which is so appealing when you want to have some wine and talk with your friends and not worry about, offending anybody at the next table and keep eating as long as you want. Like the best thing there, they come over and they're just like, how many meatballs do you want? And it's not like with a dish. It's just like just meatballs. Like it's just on a plate, meatballs with the best sauce you've ever had. And you order like one for everybody, and he comes back and he's like, "Do you want more?" And he's like, "Yep," because they're so delicious.
Yeah. No, it's great that and also that you have the experience of the waiter who's like, "I know what you ordered," and you're still like, "This place is the best."
Still. And like I knew I was right, but I also looked at this guy. I was like, "I'm not having a fight with this guy in the middle of the dining room."
So, this is actually another funny story here. So one of the last times I was there, when I was living on the East Coast last fall, I would go to New York about once a month for work stuff, and I like to go to Elio's whenever I can and see Anne and stuff. Anyway, I'm leaving, and Tom Selleck is sitting at a table, sort of towards the entrance, and I've never been more starstruck in my life. Like I'm a huge Magnum PI fan, and I was just like, like I was like freaked out. And I went up to his table and I'm like, "Can I say hi?" And he's like, "Sure." And I'm like sort of like slowly like being pulled in by the tractor beam. I'm just like, I have no idea like what's happening. Again, so Star Trek. I've never been so starstruck in my life. And the concierge taps me on the shoulder. He's like, "Leave him alone." He's just like, "Let's go. Like, don't bother the man." And apparently, like, it's he's been in there before. Like they all know who he is, and that's part of the. It's Upper East Side. I think Gwyneth Paltrow has talked about how much she loves Elio's. Like she grew up going there. So like there are everyone's been there, and it's like
it's a place.
So part of the chaos is the concierge protecting the fancy people. They just want a meatball. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, did Tom Selleck have his mustache or not?
Oh yeah,
did he still wear the mustache? Excellent.
He still has a mustache. He looks awesome. I mean, he's an old man, but like he still has a mustache. And he sounds like Tom Selleck. Like he has like sort of like a weird high pitched like sort of cracky voice. I was like, "Can I say hi?" He's like, "Sure." Like so. Anyway,
that's funny.
But anyway, so the thing that I was reaching for though is I have an old postcard from. This is for if people are watching on YouTube. It's from Petaluma, which is another restaurant that Anne had opened. But this is interesting. I'm gonna read it. This is like a postcard they created when they opened it up, and on the back it says Italian food served in an attractive pastel dining room with a wood burning oven or outdoors surrounded by flowers. Petaluma features fresh grilled fish and meats and a variety of salads, pastas, gnocchi, and risotto. Blah blah blah. Homemade desserts. Full bar and wine list, large parties accommodated, prompt service before and after theater. It's like, again, like I read this, I read the list of patterns in this book, and you realize that like a place, an experience, a restaurant, like it can feel like a poem, and it's very simple language, but like, you get it right, and there's a feeling, of like humanness, as you were saying before. That is often overlooked, and certainly the market doesn't care about. When you're talking about Bryant Park, it's easy to think what Bryant Park could be. It could just be another like high rise. That's what the market would want, right?
Definitely, somebody will pay you $1 billion for that piece of land. Yeah. I guess it's like I think restaurants are great examples because we all know what it feels like when it is done well. And I guess the degree of care and attention and consistency that goes along with it that is so durable when done well, and why you end up with these kind of like legendary places that people go back to again and again because there's a feeling of you're being looked after, and you're being looked after by people who understand what it means to have a good time in this context and what having a good food means. And then we all know the 10,000 examples where none of those things are true, and where the priorities of efficiency and like a template for a restaurant, franchise type operations, for cheapness, for drive-through car accessibility, for whatever, are the things that are being emphasized.
Right.
And they feel like shit. And so many things in the world take on that character when it's only the needs of the business or the material or the existing systems are what are emphasized. And so I think it's like, I don't know, it's almost like an act of resistance to like build a place where people feel looked after as humans, and to try to inject more of that in the face of kind of the overwhelming homogeneity of so many modern experiences.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember it's like I got like a family member gave me a hard time because I was like, I wanted pizza. And I was like, I want pizza, but I want it to be made by people who like care about what they're doing. And they're like, oh, you want artisan pizza, like artisanal pizza? And I'm like, I mean, if that's what you call it, I guess that's what I want. But like, I don't think that's not a bad thing to want. Not only just for myself, but for the people making the pizza. Like, I don't want things made by people who don't care at all about what they're doing. That's that's sad for them too. That sounds very bougie though. Like, it's like, it makes you feel like, oh, I only want like some sort of luxury good. And I'm like, no, like I just like want the world to be comprised of people who care about what they're doing.
I guess that's actually a really good point. Like, I think a huge curse and like a failure of the 20th century design schools, which have spent, this is just one, of course, there's many others that have like tried to address how to make things wonderful in the modern era and have had these various utopian visions. But unfortunately, we are in a place where for most people, the experience of high design or even a designed experience is completely overlapped with luxury and wealth and access. And it's a privilege of the wealthy or the upper class or whatever to have access to these things. And that's such a shame and such a failure, because you can do affordable, great design. And there's lots of good examples. But it's like the first thing to go, I guess. Like, think of like a city, like planning something. It's like, well, what's the budget? Like that's the start. And there's only so many people who are going to take the step and say, okay, maybe that's the budget. But within that, what are we going to do? How are we going to address the needs of all these people that we serve? And instead, it gets boiled down to lowest common denominator types of solutions to things, because they're cheap, because they're known, because they've been done before. And so many people are excluded from experiencing what it means to have a well-designed space, or a well-designed experience, I guess. And, are so grateful when like there's a breakthrough where a great experience is provided at a low price. We have the SkyTrain here in Vancouver, so-called because it's like in a lot of places it's an elevated monorail, although in a lot of places it's also a subway. And it's like super affordable, great stations, timely, doesn't break down because it's all pretty new. Beautiful trains. They're expanding it, huge new lines going up. And it's like just like such a huge positive for the city. And a lot of the expansion was done in advance of the 2010 Olympics. And, Vancouver, like all cities, has its, problems and its strengths. But that's one where it's just like, you'll never hear anybody say a single bad thing about the SkyTrain, because it's like $2 to get anywhere in the city. It's fast. It's clean. It's nice. The stations are in good places. Like, it's just like, it's a great, well-designed system. And it's like the antidote to like the sort of sprawl that happens in so many cities, because people can actually get around, and it's actually connected to the in Vancouver, like a lot of places, is sort of the mega city with Vancouver surrounded by other cities. And the SkyTrain is connected to those. And so people can commute in on it safely, cheaply, quietly, work on train kind of thing. So it's like, when that does break through, it's like such a huge success. And it's, fueled by good design thinking, good planning, good technology that's fast and reliable. And, it's electric and it's quiet and emission free and all those things. And it's like, there are so many people fighting for these things in cities and spaces. But the sort of like the default seems to constantly be, just whatever's cheapest and whatever is like, secure or whatever other thing is being prioritized by the people planning it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a phrase that has become, I hear come across more often, is like the purpose of a system is what it does.
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of like, so you look at cities that are failing or otherwise struggling to build infrastructure that actually serves the people in the city. And you're like, okay, well, there's something wrong with the system itself that needs to be fixed and how we make these decisions. But again, I sort of feel like the beauty of Alexander's work and why I think why it's endured is this idea that like, there are probably like some default answers that like, you don't have to think about that hard. Like you were saying, like windowsill height, like that's a no-brainer. The budget doesn't matter there. Just like draw that into the plan, and you won't screw up like a fundamental thing. And I think this is where I'm going to talk about like modern web design and like components and stuff like that. And like I'm an HTML CSS by hand guy, just because like I learned how to make websites in like the 90s, like the late 90s, and then this was like a state of arrested development. Like I've just sort of like never progressed beyond that because I never actually did it for work officially, and but I've just recently been like mucking around with like React and these frameworks and stuff like that, and I'm like, oh, like. Okay, yeah, we're at this point where it's like, this is what a form is like. You don't need to think about all the details anymore. And like, the kids these days, like they don't know what it's like to craft the HTML tags and getting the titles and names right and everything like that for the form to work well. It's just been done. And like, it's awesome to see. I think it's great. There's there's kind of like, oh, this is sad. It's homogenizing the internet, but it's like, no. Like, look, there are a few things that you just don't have to think about anymore.
Yeah.
Build on those.
Having Lego blocks that have already, had built into them so many of the requirements like responsive layout or accessibility labels or keyboard navigability or whatever that you don't have to roll by hand. It's like, it's wonderful. And it makes it really quick to put stuff together for people. I'm glad you brought this up because like, this is definitely what I think about a lot. And a big part of like scaling up Slack, there's a whole team within the company that was building the design library and design system called SlackKit. And they were solving this not just at the level of like, the implementation, but, making sure everything agreed with everything else that happened in Slack. And it's a really hard problem. And the payoff is tangible, but boy, do you have to put in a lot of work to get there, especially when you're doing it sort of post hoc with an organically quickly grown system that grew up from prototypes to huge scale in a rapid number of years. And I was thinking about how many patterns there are now that have built up over the last 30 years of interface design, whether it's web stuff from the birth of the browser in the 90s. Or mobile patterns that have shot up over the last 15 years or whatever it is now, 18 years since the iPhone. And I was trying to make a list for myself. I was on the plane and I was like, what ones would I list for a pattern language for the web or for, tech today, screens today. And I came up with like some good and bad ones. So like some good ones, like undo. Undo has been around for like a long time in operating systems, right? But it's often not implemented in web and mobile patterns. It's often very difficult to undo in action. When it is there, it's so great. I think, I don't know if it works so great, but like the shake to undo in a few mobile apps is funny. And when you're in a web interface and you press Command Z and the right thing happens, it's like so satisfying. It's like, oh, thank you. I didn't mean to, delete that file or whatever it happened to be. But it's like, it's not actually widely implemented because it's not something that's like built into the frameworks for the most part, right?
Interesting, yeah.
Something like dark mode, 10 years ago didn't really exist. Maybe 15 years ago didn't exist. And now it's like table stakes for a lot of people. Like if your app doesn't have dark mode, or even if your website doesn't have dark mode, people are like, fuck this. And they're gone, or they'll modify it somehow with some after party tool. And so like, that's a pattern that, just speaks to the needs of people about how they want screens to project light into their face, that, has become expected, for at least like the, top tier of users. Same kind of thing goes with like theming, keyboard shortcut customization, all these kind of like higher order goods of an interface. You can have the interface and it can be functional, but like over time, we're expecting these other things. Another one is like warm screens, being able to change the color temperature of your screens. And this is now, built into Android and iOS. But for a long time, if you wanted to have like a nice yellow screen in the evening, you had to, implement some third-party thing and often like kind of override whatever the OS was trying to do. Anyway, I can go on. And then there's like a bunch that are like emerging, which we don't really have the patterns for yet. These would be like the 3 asterisk type patterns, but like there's this idea now that you can have total recall over the screens that you've looked at, the text that you've had on those screens, conversations you've even had in real life with those wearables and stuff. And like, obviously lots of people are concerned about surveillance technology, all of the questions that fall out of that sort of like can of worms. But there's also potentially really, really interesting positives to come out of that. And sort of the same thing goes with conversational interfaces generally, and like context windows and like all this stuff that's emerging with AI and voice activated use of our systems. And I just think like this is like work that is constantly ongoing. And as people's expectations of our screens change, the patterns are going to have to change. And in many places, we're still catching up to, as you were pointing out, things that are solved decades ago that just haven't like percolated through everywhere. I was checking out for a ferry reservation yesterday, and it just wouldn't go through. Pressing the checkout button, it's just, I can tell it's not happy with me, but nothing's happening. And I had to go up and like manually look through, and I was like, oh, I forgot to fill in the country form, the country drop down in my like credit card form. But nothing had been implemented in that interface to scroll me up there, to mark it as required, to mark it as an error. It was just like, nope, you just can't go any further. And like, I could figure it out, but like my dad or something would just like, he'd be like, well, I guess I can't buy a ferry ticket. Like it doesn't work.
Yeah, which is it's a huge issue. I mean, as plenty of journalists, I think, have like done these little stunts kind of things. It's like, I tried to live without a phone for a month, and it's like, you can't live in a city without a phone anymore. Like you can't get an Uber, you can't order food, you can't make reservations or whatever it is, without a smart, like even trying to just do it with a dumb phone. Yeah. We're constantly being funneled into these apps. Even like paying for parking at a lot of places, like you need an app to do it. And, and if we're not getting those experiences right, like you described, like we're leaving, there are a lot of people that are being marginalized because of that.
Yeah. Even if people's lives, it's so miserable. Like you say, like being able to park and like you have to download a new app in order to pay for it. And like you can't use the change that maybe, like, again, to use an example, my dad would have in his like truck, he'd have like a few bucks in change. And like, he doesn't have a phone. So it's like, he literally can't use that service.
That's right. I mean, and the thing is like, I'm good with tech, like, I thought your story was gonna be like, oh, so I like opened up the console and like just reran the thing to see like what the error was. Like, there's all sorts of stuff that like super nerdy people can do to figure out, why things aren't working out. Mm-hmm. But like, we are absolutely unique, or not necessarily unique, but there aren't that many of us. But I think the broader point is just sort of like, we have built the world, or we're building, at least like in the West or like a lot of like rich countries, a world in which like you can't opt out of using these technologies. And there are consequences of that. I always refuse to sort of make normative statements like, is this a good or bad thing? But it's, a little bit of both. I mean, it's funny, as you were talking about SlackKit and the attempt at figuring out all the patterns for, I guess, like the Slack universe, and how hard it is to figure out that retroactively. That is another, I think, just great endorsement for this book and the scale, like you said, like the scales at which it works. It's sort of like, you could just go through it backwards and be like, okay, like I mean, there's a pattern that I didn't read, which is different chairs. like, like I'm going to assume that he's saying like, it's good to have different kinds of chairs in a room or something like that, because for some reason he's figured out, you can do that. Like we can, it's not so much like retroactively isn't the right way to describe like fixing the world this way. It's just like recognizing it's like, we're always building the world at lots of different scales, and there's a lot of different decisions you can make at different levels as you go along.
And I think also that if you make things, if you patternize things, if you build them into design languages, if you build them into frameworks, and then percolate that out through communities of practice, like it's a hugely influential, slow way to influence the world, to change the world. I guess it's like the like cliche thing about like growing up to try and make the world a better place. It's like you can fight all sorts of fights, you can try and solve certain types of problems, but like I think designers of all types have this like soft power in the world for the kinds of outcomes we end up with.
Right.
And I think if you're a good designer, you care about the humans using whatever you're building. And
right.
That's where you can offer, antidotes to a lot of the modern ills, I guess. To the Slackit example, like that was not like my team. It's a group of people that I worked with a lot, and I used the stuff they built. They did a great job. And, one of the axes for them was baking accessibility, web accessibility in properly to all these components. At a time when that was optional. Like there were some laws coming online in places like California about like accessibility standards. But for the most part, I mean, like you weren't going to get in trouble if you didn't meet all these requirements.
Yeah.
By doing it, I mean, it's that sort of insight of universal design that if you make something that is accessible to all types of people with different types of abilities, with different, in the case of computers, input and output, interfaces, that kind of stuff, you're going to make it better for everybody. It's the sort of curb cut idea. You soften the curb at an intersection, and it's not just accessible now for the person in a wheelchair, but for the parent pushing a stroller, or for somebody pulling their groceries behind them or whatever, and it makes it better for everybody. And it's just like this small decision, maybe like at a modest increased cost, this curb cut that makes the whole better for everybody. And I think with digital infrastructure, it's the same way. If you have the confidence that a lot of these considerations are baked in along the way, then the whole thing is just going to be that much more reliable. You're going to trust it. You're going to use it more. And it's going to be accessible to a broader range of people. And when it's not, you don't. You end up with all these, all these taxes and frictions on things that make the world an inhospitable place to inhabit. Yeah.
It was interesting. I mean, as you're saying this, I'm reminded a lot of, so we lived in Munich for 3 years, and so Munich is like famously like one of the world's best cities to live in. And it was an amazing privilege to live in a city like that. Like you can see really what it's like. And it is all of these considerations that are made. I mean, there's this thing, the English Garden there, which is, what's it called? Like open, positive outdoor spaces. I mean, it's like paragon of a positive outdoor space. It's just incredible. Bike paths, just like old people everywhere. Like it has it all. And in fact, like I always have a collection of like business cards and just like receipts and ticket stubs and stuff that I always save to use as bookmarks in books when I read. But this is one from a gelato place down the street from us in Munich that we loved. Where it's, you should have gelato places in your neighborhood. But there's a conservatism though that comes with Munich, which is that like Bavarian culture, they know what they're about. Like they know how to live. They're like, yes, you are allowed to have gelato between May and October, or whatever, like, when the gelato place is open. It closes for, seasonally. They're like, you should drink beer at the beer garden, like frequently, but like you only get drunk a few times a year, and you you ski, you ski in the winter, you swim in lakes in the summer, you can go to Greece or Spain for vacation. Like they're like the life, like they have it dialed in. Like it is the way it's an amazing way to live, but they're just like, that's it. Like, don't do anything else,
Right.
Also, these are the flavors of gelato you're allowed to have, and so once again, you figure out sort of the patterns of how things should be, a conservatism can set in and be like, no, like this is how curbs are supposed to be. And it's a really tricky balancing act to figure out. It's like, okay, look, like what are the things that we should be innovating on? And what are the things like, what? It's settled. Don't mess with it.
I like that. It's like the things you're talking about in Munich. It's like there's like a rhythm and a proportion to things that are like understood and sort of built into the fabric. But then, what the sort of American mind, rejects is like that can become a rut, right? That can become
that's right.
Living in like a Swiss Alpine village, like sort of simulation of what a city should be like, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences like you're talking about, like in Copenhagen, where everything's like a human scale, the access to the water, the like integration of all sorts of different types of amenities like throughout the city, these beautiful green spaces, these incredible architecture, but it's like unobtrusive somehow. It's amazing. And then I took my kids to Disneyland last year down in Anaheim, and it nearly destroyed my soul, despite it being like a wonderful, once in a lifetime memory for them doing the roller coasters and stuff. But holy shit, taking a car from LAX out to Anaheim, like I wanted to die. But then, you know what? It's 9 at night. We're shutting down the park. The kids did, what's the one called, like Grizzly River Run or Grizzly Rapids or something like that. It's like a water.
I've never been.
A water ride. It's super fun. There's nobody around, so they just got to ride it like 6 times in a row, just like hop right back on. And I'm standing there watching them having a total blast. They're filming it as they go and all that kind of stuff. And like overhead, a SpaceX rocket is launching, and it's got that crazy like plasma plume behind it because of the atmosphere. Things were just right. And for all the like lovely things that we're talking about in this like beautiful pattern language, you make a good point. There are disruptive fundamental changes in society, which, by definition are going to be destructive and are going to jolt things out of their pattern. And, if you look at where Europe's at, where North America's at right now, particularly the last month or whatever, these visions of how society should be organized are in tension. You can have roller coasters and freeways and SpaceX rockets, or you can have your beer garden and your coalition government and your kind of like staged set way of like how life is going to be in Munich. And there's got to be a middle ground that can satisfy both, that can have the innovation of Apple, but the beautiful integrated life of, Mexico City. And that can, launch rockets to Mars and also, make sure that, I don't know, windowsills are the right height. Like there's got to be something in between. It doesn't have to be such an extreme. And I guess, I don't know about you. I'm very curious to see how the 21st century goes.
I think that's why, I think I'll just thank you again for like having me finally pick up this book, because I do think it has an answer. It proposes to me a very compelling answer, which is like there are some things that are figured out, and the answer is it's certainly not top down application of these things. It's an understanding of how things work and being thoughtful about humans at different scales and different timelines, and paying attention to the things that might not be obvious when you're planning stuff, and it comes together again emergently. Over time, there's one other thing I just want to shout out, because I think you'll find this interesting. But there's this group called Renaissance Philanthropy. I know some of the people running it, but they used a pattern language as their inspiration for creating playbooks for philanthropists and other funders to be like, hey, if you want to do this kind of make this sort of gesture, with it as foundations do. In fact, I should pull it up, but like policy, entrepreneurship, market shaping, like prize competitions. If you're going to do like a prize competition, like how should you do it? And they crafted it after a pattern language, being like, okay, like you can do one of these things, but like you have to understand that it's part of a broader thing. And I do see that as being, it's like sort of my idealized vision of the future is one in which like a lot of it's the web, man. It's just like it's small, loosely decoupled parts interacting, and going in a direction. But I would say probably less very heavy-handed top-down prescriptive stuff, more bottom-up stuff. That's what I'd like.
I read a quote, which I won't be able to pull from memory, but the gist of it was civilization advances by each generation taking for granted the things which the one before had to figure out. And it's true. Yeah. We all get on an airplane without really thinking about it. And like 120 years ago, it was impossible. And I think, done really well, we can encapsulate those things that we've learned into the systems and into the frameworks and into the policies and regulations and everything else so that the next generation gets all the benefits and can avoid the pitfalls. And I think that's what's so dangerous about the current moment, not to get into politics, but like you can't just smash it all to bits and expect to maintain the parts that were working. You're going to lose both the good and the bad. And so, it's long form work, but I love this as an example of how to do it well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for this. You've opened my mind, expanded my vocabulary. So I can now speak in pattern language or whatever, at least know the concept. But this has been awesome. Is there anything else you want to comment on the story or the story?
The takeaway I have from all of this, I really enjoyed it. Thank you. I've had Seeing Like a State sitting on my bedside table in my stack for 6 months, and I haven't cracked it yet. So I think I know what I got to read.
Okay. All right. Yeah. It's surprisingly, I mean, it's funny, I'm a guy who used to surf, who once knew how to surf and reads books. Seeing Like a State is an intimidating book, but I somehow read it. It's so interesting. And, actually, rest in peace, John C. Scott. I forget the guy's name. Anyway, he died last year. The author. But he had such a great, knack for titles. I mean, Seeing Like a State just by itself is, James C. Scott, Jim Scott. Seeing Like a State is a great title. He has another book that I haven't read, but I talk about all the time, which is called Weapons of the Weak, which, he was very interested in like anarchy and how people resisted state governance. And so he did all this research on how people who were like populations that were being basically taken over by, some form of empire or state that was forming, how they would resist the state. And so Weapons of the Weak it's just an awesome title. So anyway, you'll enjoy it. You can come on and we'll talk about it.
Cool. Yeah. Let's do it again in a year.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No pressure. Take your time.
All right, Jed.
All right. No, thank you. All right. I hope you enjoyed that. That concludes part 2 of the ongoing Tumblr series. So, I met Johnny and I know each other through Tumblr. Mark Coatney, who was on the podcast before, similar situation there. We met when he was working at Tumblr, and then we had some interaction. But of course, I followed Mark on Tumblr. There are other people that I met on Tumblr back in the day that have remained in my life, and I've actually developed enduring relationships with. So Tumblr really was a magical time. I will put a link to my old Tumblr in the show notes. It's pretty good. Every now and then I'll dip in there. There's lots of interesting stuff in there. Tumblr really was great when it was around, when it was a thing. I think it's still a thing. But anyway, maybe more to come in the Tumblr series. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed that. The next episode, I have not recorded yet. I'm actually about to head to Utah for our Cloud Native Geospatial Forum conference that we're doing this week. And there I will record in person with Alex Moreau an episode about a book called Convenience Store Woman. And I don't remember the author's name. It's a Japanese woman who wrote it. And an essay about Marcel Duchamp and his rejection of work. So anyway, I'm looking forward to that one, and that will come out sometime in May. So you can read ahead for that, and I'll put the details in the show notes as well. As always, thanks to Secret School for creating the intro music for this podcast. The song you're hearing right now is 3/10 of the Population by We. If you like this, tell your friends, share it with people, rate and review, like and subscribe, blah, 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 all that stuff. If you have a grant you want to give out to something like this, let me know. And thanks for listening, though. It's such a joy to get to do this and to know there are people out there who enjoy it too. So see you next month.